Hey all, it's another clear day here in Texas, and yeah, I think my microphone's on and working, so we shouldn't have that problem that we've had the past couple of days here. Had an eclipse this morning. I don't know if anybody got out to see that. If you did, feel free to mention that in the chat there. I slept right through that. I had to work on the IFR column up until about 2 a.m. and I was out of it after that. Anyway, it's a clear day here in Texas, and let's take a look at the charts here. I decided to start with the hemispheric chart here. We haven't really looked at this very much, but this is showing the 300 millibar, or the 30,000 foot flow around the entire hemisphere. So we have Asia over here on this side, and there's Europe. And then off to the top right, we have Africa. And then over here, we have North America and Greenland right there. So North Pole, that's always going to be slightly closer to North America than Asia, so right about there. And we can kind of see how the flow comes around the entire hemisphere. So we've got a zonal flow, slightly northwesterly in our area. You can see that jet coming in off the Pacific here and flowing through the central U.S. And then it looks like we got a little bit of a blocking pattern. You remember a couple of days ago we were talking about all that warm air over Asia. Let me see if I can bring that up. I know I forgot something here. Yeah, there's my IFR columns that I've been working on. Let me bring up digital atmosphere. Trying to remember what directory it's in. Huh. That's weird. Let me see if I can switch over to my other directory here. Q. Oh, okay. Here we go. Digital atmosphere is coming up, and let me get us some current data. This will take just a minute, and we'll set that for 01Z for the last hour. Now we're just waiting for it to import. And let me go ahead and set that on Siberia. So we'll take a look out in that region. And there's Siberia and the Kamchatka Peninsula. Now these are METARs, so we don't have a whole lot of coverage into Siberia itself. So we're kind of limited to the actual airports. And you can see there's only 3 airports that we can see in Russia here. There's Anadyr, Magadan, and Yakutsk. And you can see Yakutsk here, they're usually the cold pole, and they're probably down about -40, -50, and you can see that fog that they've got in that region. But we got 20s up in this region, and a few 30s that I was seeing last night. A whole bunch of warm air is coming to this region, and that's the reason we're getting that large cutoff high in that region. So that's actually forming a block. And as a result, that's kind of got the flow locked up. And it looks like at this point the flow is starting to traverse south of that cutoff and join up into the southern stream that we've got in this region. So we'll probably see that high wander around for a few days, and let's see what happens to that. There's that cutoff high right there, and slowly weakening, but it sends a little bit of a branch into the Northwest Territories over the weekend. And looks like it's pretty much gone by midweek there. So that's what's going to happen to all that warm air. It's going to be pretty much gone there. And then looks like things start to get really active out here in the Pacific in about a week or two. And you can see this really strong negative tilt trough coming towards the west coast. And let's see what happens to that. Yeah, a couple of good waves come on shore around the middle of the month. So it looks like continued stormy pattern there in Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia. And then anything else? Yeah, this big polar vortex centered over the Hudson Bay region. This is kind of significant for a couple reasons. One is that, well, when this is parked over the Canadian region like that, that tends to send Arctic air southeastward into the U.S. itself. So Northwest Territories and the prairies and the northern U.S. right in line right there. But there is a flip side to that. If you look on the other side, you can't really get a free lunch with that. There's also going to be warm air heading north. And we don't talk about that too much, but it is there. So a huge river of warm air coming north from the Gulf Stream waters up to the polar regions here. So let's see what happens with that. I'm going to switch over to a different chart showing the temperature anomaly. And what we'll do is we'll look out here towards Greenland. We can see one storm system coming off the Canadian Maritimes here, and here's a wedge of warm air working its way north. And let's see what happens to this shot of warm air. You can see some of it works up the Greenland coast. And it's a little bit off the top there, but if you look up here, that little dot right there, that's the North Pole. Yeah, see here? This gray area, this is where we have a temperature anomaly of 35 to 40 degrees Celsius. So a very strong warming taking place up in northern Greenland. And you can see that kind of spirals southward. And it ends up on the flip side up in the Canadian high Arctic up here. So that's kind of weird, just kind of a very long circuitous path across the Canadian, across the polar ice pack, and then it ends up back up in northern Canada. That's pretty weird. And when we have that southern stream in place, it looks like we're going to get kind of a shot of maybe that warm air kind of inserting itself in the flow, and that'll end up moving southward across Canada. So that's probably going to factor into this cold northwesterly flow pattern. It's going to be kind of an alternating cold pattern with shots of mild or warm air coming southward. So here's one shot of that warm air. It's kind of ironic seeing that warm air coming out of Manitoba and the prairies and set in winter, but there it is around the 10th. And then looks like after that we finally start to get a little bit more polar air moving southward. So that's going to be another thing to look for. Keep an eye up north. We don't always get cold air coming from the northern latitudes. Okay, so let's go ahead and head into the regular chart sequence. You're probably all very familiar with this. That's the isobars and thickness. And we see a lot of thickness packing from the central into the northwest U.S. So we're looking strictly at the red and blue lines, and it forms this band that goes throughout this entire area here. So up to the north, lots of cold air, and down to the south, that's where our tropical air is. Okay, so let me take a quick look at chat, make sure we don't have any problems. Looking good, got 26 people in, that's awesome. Let's see, we got S. Kinney here, and Fun with Tech, Sue M. Got photos of the lunar eclipse, awesome. Jeff Krob is with us, and Adam Davis. Looks like he's feeling better there. David Holcomb is here. Fun with Tech reports audio is good. Ryan Toomey's down there in Florida reporting 55 degrees this morning with clear skies. Warmed up to 72. David Moore, 68 degrees there. And Burl H is here. Fred Reamer, Electric Dog, made it in. David Moore saw the eclipse at 6:30 this morning. Sue M got to go to Irkutsk. That's awesome. I've always wanted to make it out there one of these days. In fact, I had a chance to serve with the Mongolian Air Force, believe it or not, back in the mid-90s. Or, yeah, they were looking for volunteers there with some sort of joint thing between the Air Force and the Mongolians. And I don't know what happened to that, but that would have definitely been interesting. Mike R. up there in San Francisco feeling like late spring, and Carl Burkhoff mentioning hi Jeff, and Jeff Krob just reading through the chat here. Mike R. Interesting pattern over the North Pole. I was here as all, and Suim was teaching and visited Irkutsk. Awesome. Okay, let's draw out where those fronts are. I think there's a very good chance we've got a front in northern Oklahoma right through this area here. And we can see, looking at the packing, it looks like that extends all the way to Nevada. So we're going to keep an eye on that area there for the possibility of a frontal zone. And then on the other side, it looks like we got a warm front somewhere around Alabama, Mississippi, and then anything extending up into the Great Lakes up in this region, that's probably going to be occluded. I mean, I can definitely see the troughing up in this region here, but that's likely to be an occluded front because it's basically going up into the cold air mass there. And then up to the north, you can see the high pressure moving in from Canada. This looks like a 1048 millibar high over the Yukon. And that extends all the way up into the Arctic Ocean. And then here's that outgoing high pressure absorbing into the Atlantic high. This is where the polar highs go to die. They head out offshore into the Atlantic, and they end up out between Florida and Cape Verde. And then off to the east, or to the west, we've got this Pacific high. I don't know if that's moving inland or not, but sometimes that does. And this is going to be a source region for air coming into Nevada and California. That drives fronts that are moving through Southern California and Utah this time of year. And that's where a lot of that cold air in that region comes from. Okay, so quick look at the upper air chart. There's the, let me see if I got a current one. Yeah, we do. There's the 500 millibar chart from 2 hours ago. You can see the polar front jet pretty much where I showed you on the hemispheric chart, going all the way from Oregon and Idaho down to the Ohio River Valley. And some of that northwesterly flow starting to come into the northern U.S. there. This is a chart that we haven't used too much. I typically use this during the spring and summer. This is the SPC mesoscale analysis, and we're going to use some more of this as we get into spring here. This has got a lot of good fields here for looking at upper air instability. Also shear. We've got quantities here relating to, for example, anvil level shear. That's good for differentiating LP supercells from HP supercells. We can look at storm relative low level wind, which is good for forecasting tornadoes. And then we have the basic bulk shear values, for example. So the next time we have a good severe weather outbreak, I'm going to try to bring up this chart, and we'll go through a lot of these quantities, and I'll show you how to use those. Some of these can be useful for finding the fronts. I think one that I've showed you is, I think, the velocity tensor magnitude. You can see the front really stands out where we have those increased values here. Kind of outlines it almost perfectly, and you can see this other front right there, kind of a double shot of frontal activity coming south. And it looks like some of that extends all the way to Nevada. You can kind of pick out a little bit of this convergence zone extending out that way. Potential temperature is another way of finding the fronts, and we use that from time to time. You can see the strong temperature gradient up north, and there's that other gradient right up there from Colorado to Oklahoma. And it looks like we can trace that gradient all the way to Nevada. So that would be the frontal position, something like that. So then I would go to the surface chart and kind of reconcile those two like that. And it looks like maybe a little bit of a piece of that extending off the Oregon coast up in this region here. Anything else to look at as far as that goes? Probably not. Oh, nice. They've got the potential temperature field. See that right here? It says surface theta. When it says just theta by itself, that's going to be potential temperature. So if you look at the red lines, that's exactly the same thing as I was showing you on that other chart here. So that's another way of looking at it. If, like, the other chart is down, you can just switch over and look at this. And I like this a lot. I'm going to probably use this frame probably in the next couple weeks. I can see up in Canada. See, for example, up here, I think we can pick out a warm front from Toronto all the way up to east of Lake Huron. That doesn't seem to show up so well on the other chart. You see the data is kind of cut off up there north of the Great Lakes. So that might be another reason to start using this chart here, since there is coverage offshore and up into Canada. Okay, anything else to look at? Let me take a look. I guess I would take into account weather concerns, winter weather. We've got this cold air coming down. Let me see if there's anything that we might want to look at here. Lake effect snow. I've never looked at these. I wonder what those do. Let's see. Boundary level, relative humidity, field colors. Okay, so it's outlining where the relative humidity is high. And then temperature differential between the surface and 5,000 feet. So it's looking at steep lapse rates, combination of that and relative humidity. So apparently those are going to be some good values to look at for checking out activity on the lakes. So anyway, I'll have to look more into that. I'm really surprised at all these tools they have here. Snow squall parameter. All right, well, I might have to put out another book covering all of these. Just so much stuff to look at. All right, let's head into the other charts and let's see where we at here. I want to cover a little bit about that cold air coming south, and I'll start with the Midwest. This is a chart from earlier today. You can see cold air up in Minnesota and Wisconsin up here. And it looks like we've just got kind of weak westerly flow, and then the main front itself starts coming down. You can see up to the very top left. See, there's the cold air on its way south, and then the old cold air mass is basically lifting on out and heading up to the Great Lakes. So this is the cold air, and we can watch that come down. Pretty good surge of cold air. This is midnight. And then by dawn, we're going to be looking at something like this. Cold air heading into the Chicago suburbs, into the Quad Cities, and approaching Kansas City. And let's see where things are going to be when we do the webcast tomorrow night. You can actually see a little bit of erosion of that cold air. I don't know if you saw that. Like right here, it looked like the cold air just kind of stopped. Let me run this through so you can see what I'm talking about. See the cold air spilling southward. And then right around here, it looked like it stopped for a second. And that's probably going to be due to the strong surface heating working on that boundary. It does tend to check the southward progress of these strong polar fronts, especially when they're shallow. And then after dark, picks right back up again, moving south. And then here's the high pressure coming south, big old 1036 millibar high. But it looks like the main thrust of that polar air is going to be into the Midwest and the Northeast U.S. Not so much for Texas. And it looks like actually by Friday, it's already starting to develop a southerly flow in the plains. So now we've got a warm front, and that's pretty much what we're expecting. We were talking yesterday about how there were like 5 or 6 outbreaks coming between now and mid-February. They're coming. These cold air masses are coming through at very fast intervals, every 2 or 3 days, and that's just going to be kind of the story of the next couple weeks. Take a look at the southern plains. For those of you in Texas, there's how things looked earlier today about midday. Yeah, cold air mass probably, or the cold front looking like that right there. Warm front up in northern Oklahoma, and you can see the strong downslope flow coming off the Cap Rock. So this would be a good setup for storms if we had a dry line day during the spring. This would be, you got the flow coming right off the Gulf, dry line and downslope flow, and with a cold front up to the north that indicates baroclinicity. So that's going to mean strong winds aloft. So this would be all the ingredients that you would need for severe weather, except today it happens to be winter. Anyway, let's see what happens. Cold air comes southward down to the Red River tomorrow night. There it is. Actually, that's tomorrow morning. Okay, there we go. There's tomorrow during the day, but even behind the front, which is all the way down to Austin and West Texas, 50s up in Oklahoma. So not very much cold air with this outbreak. Much of that's going on up into the Midwest. Okay, so Thursday night, one last day of ridging, and then the flow starts turning around to the south, starting with the plains and then extending gradually down to the Rio Grande. And then by Friday, deep southerly flow throughout much of western and central Texas air. Okay, for those of you in the southeast U.S., let's see how things look for you. I know Ryan is down there. Starting out, there's that outgoing polar high pressure earlier today. And this is the current map showing just south flow everywhere. And then there's not going to be much weather probably until about Friday. Yeah, here comes the front. This is very, very early on Friday. And then during the day on Friday, this is about midday. Front's all the way down to Florida. However, the freeze line is way up to the north of Atlanta and Huntsville. And you can see the high pressure way up to the north. It looks like that high is going to take a track well up in the northeast U.S. right there. So we should just see the flow start to gradually turn around to the south. Okay, I don't know if anybody's in the northeast U.S. I don't think we have very many viewers up there, but starting out, there's our outgoing high pressure area, flow coming around to the south in the Great Lakes region. And the current map looks like that right there, south flow. And then here comes our system out from the west. And then during the day tomorrow, there comes a big wedge of cold air spreading west to east. And then towards the end of the period, late Friday night, looks like our high is down there in Ohio and Kentucky. So that high will be rapidly out of the picture, and then flow will be coming around to the south. And then for the rest of everything, I'll just refer you to the GFS, and that'll give you kind of a quick look at the mesoscale details. Let's take a look at the air mass. Let's look at Bismarck. We know that from everything we've seen, we know that Bismarck is north of that polar front. So let's check them out. There's the Bismarck SQT. We got northwest flow all the way up through the entire column. 60 knot flow up there at 30,000 feet, so the jet is in the area, and we can see the tropopause is kind of low. That's only at about 24, probably about 25,000 feet there. So this is all the stratosphere. Here's the modified tropical air mass. And then below that, we've got the polar air mass itself. So down at the surface, we've got about 12 degrees Fahrenheit, very steep lapse rates indicating strong modification. And then above that, we pick up the frontal inversion in blue here. And then at the very top, we pick up the frontal surface, and that's up at about 10,000 feet. So this is the way we take a look at the air mass constituents vertically. So cold modifying air mass right down here, the frontal zone above that, and then the tropical air mass above that, and then the stratosphere above that. So that's a pretty easy to follow building block of what's happening in Bismarck, and you can take that and you can relate it to the upper air charts and the surface chart there. Let's see what else we should look at. Let's go all the way down to the opposite area. Let's try Corpus Christi, Texas. So they're definitely very warm. Some pretty good moisture there. And then above that, we hit what looks like a frontal inversion here. And in fact, it is kind of a frontal inversion. I think we're removing some old polar air that's moving away. And a lot of times what we'll see here, especially when we have dry air aloft, that can be a subsidence inversion from the subsidence underneath the subtropical high there. So some of that's probably happening too. Then above that, we've got a little moisture from the subtropical jet, which is in the area, I think. Yeah, it's definitely up there. 50 knot winds up at the top of the column. And then you can see how high that tropopause is. There's that trop way up there at about 46,000 feet. So much different air mass in that region. Let's take a look at Albany, New York, up there in the northeast U.S. Very high tropopause, so that's kind of unexpected, but they've had a little bit of warm air, I think, in that area. That's about all I can, at least that's my immediate impression there. Near the surface, there is some cold air. Looks like about 6,000 feet deep, and then above that, the column does look a little bit warm. This is the tropical segment, and if we take that down between the moist and dry adiabatic lapse rate, we get about 50 Fahrenheit, which is pretty warm for that area that time of year. So there's a little bit of warm air in the mid-levels here. And we don't look at SQTs too much in Southern California, but I'll give you San Diego. And looks to be a pretty dry column there. Tropopause is up near the top of the chart. And don't see any inversions or anything like that up and down the column, so probably not much dynamical weather taking place at this time. All right, let's check out the satellite real quick. This is the polar orbiter data. You can definitely see that snowpack way up there in Canada. A lot of this is actually old snow. Things pretty quiet there in the southern U.S., and it looks like some sort of storm system down there in Mexico. That's interesting. We can take a look at that on the GOES satellite imagery. Let me bring that up. And there it is. I haven't looked at that too much. I wonder if that's an old tropical system. Probably Orion knows a little bit about that. He's probably been following that. But whatever that is, there it is spinning around, and that's sending some moisture up into Mexico. And that could make it up into Texas as mid and upper level moisture in that region. And I'll give you the water vapor imagery. And this is where you can really see the mid and upper level moisture spreading up towards Texas there. The other Pineapple Express that we talked about in the Gilligan's Island area, that's spreading northward. There it is, heading up towards California and Oregon. And it looks like we have another plume there near Hawaii spreading moisture northward. So it looks to be stormy there in the northwest U.S. A lot of moisture heading for Seattle and Vancouver there. Okay, let me get caught up with the chat here real quick. Adam Davis says SPC mesoscale analysis is a wonderful tool. Yeah, I agree. And when you use that SPC mesoscale analysis, let me go back to that. What window did I have that open in? I'll just bring up a new one. Okay, this is the tool that we're talking about, SPC mesoscale analysis there. And if you want to get to that, it's easy. Just go to spc.noaa.gov and put in EXPER in the URL. And that'll take you to that, and then that's going to be under this meso analysis graphics. It's very important to be familiar with where this data comes from. A lot of people use this tool and they don't understand where the data is coming from. And you really have to understand that aspect of using your tools. In this case, people think that this is observed data, like if you're looking at 500 millibar plots, they think this comes from radiosonde data. But this is actually fields from the rapid refresh model. So SPC mesoscale analysis comes from the rapid refresh model. So this is basically model output, except you're just looking at the immediate short term. It's using those initial products there. So that's just something to bear in mind there. Okay, let me go back to those satellite pictures. Okay, Jeff Kropp says he's got another WindGrids update being released. WindGrids, awesome software, and I was using it 3 hours ago to do my IFR column. In fact, maybe I can show you what I was doing. I was covering an aircraft accident in Kentucky about 3 years ago using some archived reanalysis data. And I used it to create this cross-section there to assess the icing. And this shows this aircraft that was heading at 9,000 feet. The green here is relative humidity. And this shows the ice regimes, and it shows how it entered this area of clear ice where the relative humidity was up above 90%. Temperature was like -6. And needless to say, it didn't make it very far. So this is a great tool, and it was able to map this cross-section and look at the weather three-dimensionally. So I'm going to be trying to cover this more in the webcast in the days ahead here. Things have just been pretty busy. I've been putting together the office here. Lexi Pinkson-Walsh is here. Andrew Hotchkiss, like in the SPC graphics. Ryan Toomey's down there in South Florida. Fred Reamer says, Zach Hargrove sent up the Rayob at Bismarck today. Excellent. And Ryan says, strong low pressure down there in Mexico. And March is only 30 days away. Okay. Time to take a look at the forecast. Let's shift gears here. And I'm trying to think what I wanted to start out with first. I guess we can take a look at that temperature anomaly product. because this is a good way of keeping track of the air masses and watching them generate. And when we see cold air developing up in the South Dakota, North Dakota area, Montana, I can tell exactly where it came from. For example, like right here, we can see Arctic air or polar air developing up there in Alberta. And as we go forward over time, you can see it grow in aerial coverage and intensity. And then we start losing it here because of air mass modification, but there it is moving southward across the Midwest. More of it starts developing up in Saskatchewan over the weekend. Then you can see this intrusion of warm air coming in from the north. We already know where that came from. So one outbreak comes through around Monday and Tuesday into the Midwest. We see up here in the Hudson Bay region, looks like more polar air developing around Churchill. And we can backtrack that and see that got started in southern Nunavut right there. So this is the outbreak that's going to be heading into Quebec, I guess. So that's not going to really be too important. More cold air developing up in Manitoba around midweek. That spreads southward. A little bit of development right there in Illinois. And then it looks like we've got kind of a warm pattern next weekend. California looking very warm and dry there. Okay, there's a bit of cold air around Monday the 12th, 13th. And I think the GFS has really backed off compared to yesterday. Yesterday was bringing in a big 1060 high southward. And I don't think I see any sign of that. In fact, we flip-flop and we've got warm air. Looking at about 30 degrees above seasonal normals there in the central U.S. So, yeah, I'm just checking out the temperature anomaly here. Yeah, that's quite a change there, but I think I'm going to wait till tomorrow, just in case it has flip-flopped the other way. So there's definitely some uncertainty there past the 8 to 9 day point. So we shall see. So, bearing that in mind, let's take a look at the forecast. The one thing that we do know is that there's going to be a quick succession of polar air mass outbreaks coming southward, and there's the first one coming down into Texas tomorrow. And this will be driven by this 1040 millibar high. So we know that that's going to move into the eastern U.S. there. So this will be in the eastern U.S. on Saturday. And then we start recharging up to the north there. There's our next outbreak starting to come together, 1040 high over Alberta on Saturday. And that'll affect mostly the Midwest. A little bit of a snowstorm developing there in Illinois and Indiana. And there it goes. So the high works through the Midwest on Monday. And moves up into the northeast U.S. and looks like we got a snow track extending from about Illinois across Cleveland, Buffalo, and up to Albany. A couple of cold polar highs come through. This next one will be on Tuesday. And we're looking for another snow track in that same area there. So a very similar pattern to what we had a few days before that. And here comes the next outbreak on Thursday, coming through at very fast intervals here. Just one Alberta clipper after another. Things quiet down, it looks like, by the 10th and 11th. And it looks like the polar air masses get a little bit weaker. 14th, very weak, 10, 35 millibar high up there in Montana, or Manitoba. And that stays pretty far up to the north. And it looks like Texas is actually kind of in a mild pattern there. Here comes the Pacific system for the 16th. This is 372 hours out, but we shall see. And we're starting to come within range of the Denver ChaserCon there. And it's too early to tell, but looking at this, we'd be looking at a Pacific system emerging out into the high plains there, and behind it, probably some cold air filtering back in. So probably some snow flurries there for Friday and Saturday, and then things looking good after that. But I expect there to be a lot of changes here on that forecast between now and then. Okay, well, I've talked for 45 minutes about fronts and highs, and that's probably about all I've got here. So anyway, I appreciate you all watching. Let me take a quick look at the chat there. Ryan says the Midwest storm spring season window is nigh. Carl Berghoff thinking there will be a very active tornado season. Sue M reminds us Groundhog Day is on the 2nd. And yeah, we've got spring coming up, and another 2 months or so we'll be getting into the thick of tornado season. Okay, well, that's about all I got for this evening. I appreciate y'all watching the webcast. Thanks for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see y'all tomorrow. Take care.